The heat struck my scalp like a hammer, thick and scalding. It dripped down my hairline, past my collarbone, and soaked straight through my cream silk blouse. I didn't flinch. I just sat there as the liquid glued the expensive fabric to my skin, pooling uncomfortably against my ribs. Above me, Marcus Pemberton gripped the rim of an empty porcelain bowl. His knuckles were bone white. His mouth hung open, exposing coffee-stained teeth as a wet, guttural laugh hacked its way out of his throat. Around us, the soft chinking of silver forks against fine china stopped dead. The smooth jazz saxophone in the background kept playing, oblivious, drifting over the sudden, suffocating silence. The smell of roasted garlic and tomato coulis clung to me, mixing violently with the sickly sweet reek of Marcus's expensive cologne. He shoved his thick hand in my face. A heavy gold pinky ring flashed under the crystal chandelier. "Watch where you're sitting, Rosalind. You owe me an apology. You ruined my jacket." I didn't look at his jacket. I looked at his shoes. Italian leather polished to a mirror shine. Exactly 6 inches from the toe of his right shoe to the heel of my heavy boot. 2 seconds. That was the exact window I needed to drop my center of gravity, sweep his left leg, and snap his knee joint completely backward. My heart didn't spike. It held steady. A calm, methodical metronome in a room full of panic. I wasn't a 51-year-old government administrator right now. My brain was simply running a threat assessment on a loud, fleshy obstacle. I didn't move a muscle. Instead, my eyes did a slow tactical sweep of table 12. My younger brother, Sebastian. 46 years old, perfectly groomed in a tailored suit that cost more than a used car. He sat back in his velvet chair, slowly swirling a glass of expensive Bordeaux. A greasy smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. He was a failure wrapped in daddy's money, a man drowning in federal debt using this dinner as a smokescreen. And he was enjoying this. My mother sat next to him. She didn't look up. Her manicured fingers were busy tearing her white linen napkin to shreds under the table. Cowardice wrapped in pearls. And then there was Adrian Ashworth, my father, the patriarch of our so-called old money bloodline. The man who held the strings to the family trust and wielded family loyalty like a blunt weapon. He didn't look at the loud, flushed man standing over me. He didn't look at the red coulis dripping off my chin onto the floor. He looked dead at me. Adrian leaned forward just an inch, his jaw locked tight, pressing his voice down into a harsh, vibrating hiss that only carried across our mahogany table. "Sit down, Rosalind." "Not, are you okay?" "Not Marcus, back off. Don't embarrass this family." The volume was practically a whisper, but it ripped through my chest faster than a rifle round. That was the real hit. The soup was nothing. The public humiliation was a joke. But the cold, calculated complicity of my own flesh and blood, that was the blade twisting in my gut. I had survived IED blasts in the blinding dust of Helmand Province. I had carried the bleeding weight of an entire squad on my back, calling in airstrikes while my ears rang with the sound of dying men. But sitting at this table under the glare of my father, I was worth less than the fragile ego of a drunk civilian. I was the unmarried daughter, the pathetic charity case, the punchline of every family dinner. They were waiting for the break. They wanted the tears. They expected the aging spinster, the low-wage government employee, to cover her face, apologize, and run crying to the bathroom. I took a slow, deliberate breath in through my nose. The sour, acidic stench of the tomato coulis was suffocating. I shut it out. I pulled up a different memory. The sharp, metallic tang of cordite, the smell of hot gun smoke in the desert. It rushed into my lungs and completely crushed the civilian smells around me. My right hand rested flat on the white tablecloth. The long, jagged scar running down my index finger twitched. Just once, I slowly raised my hand. I didn't shake. I didn't rush. The muscles beneath my ruined, sticky shirt coiled tight, hard as steel. I reached up and took the empty porcelain bowl right out of Marcus's hand. He let it go. He actually took a half step back. The drunken smirk wiped clean off his face because he finally looked into my eyes. He wasn't looking at the pathetic sister anymore. He was looking into a void. Absolute dead-eyed zero. The look you get when you've had to hose down the back of a Chinook helicopter. The look of someone whose literal job is to clean up a battlefield. He felt it, a primal animal realization that he had cornered something he couldn't comprehend. I stood up, all 5'11" of me. I didn't open my mouth to explain. I didn't raise my voice to argue. You don't negotiate with noise. You don't reason with dead weight. I raised my right arm, muscles locking into place, and brought the bowl down hard against the solid oak floor. The porcelain exploded with a violent, ear-splitting crack that made half the restaurant flinch. Jagged white shards ricocheted like shrapnel, embedding themselves deep into the toe of Marcus's expensive leather shoes. He jumped back, stumbling heavily into a waiter, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "You just made a fatal mistake." My voice was entirely flat, dry as bone. No anger, no yelling. Just a terrifyingly calm statement of fact. I didn't wait for him to stutter out a response. I didn't look back at Adrian, Sebastian, or the mother who couldn't even meet my gaze. I simply turned my back. The heavy heels of my boots struck the oak floor, beating out a slow, methodical rhythm all the way to the glass doors. I left them choking on my silence. Have you ever sat at a table full of family and realized you were completely alone? If you've ever had to swallow your pride just to keep the peace for people who don't respect you, I want you to drop a 1 in the comments right now. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Take a second to let me know in the comments. Alright, let's dive into what happens next. The Atlantic wind ripped off the Thames the second I pushed through the glass doors. It carried the smell of diesel exhaust and river salt. The cold air hit my soaked silk blouse. It froze the tomato paste flat against my skin. I did not shiver. I stopped under the brass awning and let the icy wind strip the artificial heat of that dining room right off my back. The street was quiet. A heavy matte black sedan slid to the curb with no headlights, just the deep, low hum of an armored V8 engine. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. The driver's side door clicked open. James stepped out. He wore a dark civilian suit, but he moved like a man who had spent 20 years carrying a heavy rifle. He opened the rear door for me. As I stepped toward the car, his eyes caught the red, sticky mess plastered across my chest. James stopped, his jaw muscles locked tight. The thick, jagged scar on his neck stretched over corded muscle. "Do I need to go inside, Commander?" His voice was a low, ugly gravel. No. I slid into the back seat. The heavy armored door slammed shut, sealing out the wind. The interior smelled of sharp leather and gun oil. The heater blasted warm air, but the chill inside my chest remained. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a heavy rubberized satellite phone, completely unmarked. I pressed the single button on the side. It rang exactly once. "Speak," Admiral Richardson's voice snapped through the encrypted line like a cracking whip. No polite greetings, just pure military efficiency. "It's Ashworth," I said. "I know who it is." The restaurant security feed just uploaded to our servers 3 minutes ago. A civilian physically assaulted an active duty Royal Navy Special Operations Commander. "Give me a name." I stared out the tinted glass. The antique gas street lamps of London blurred past in streaks of yellow light. "It's an internal family matter, Admiral. A drunk idiot with a fragile ego. I handled it. You handled a bowl of soup to the chest." Whitaker's voice was sharp, cutting. "You hold a level 7 security clearance, Rosalind. You know the protocol. The man who laid hands on you in a public space didn't just touch my officer. He laid hands on a classified military asset. The Royal Navy does not tolerate unauthorized contact with its personnel." I kept my voice dead flat. I broke his shoe. I embarrassed him. "That's enough." "It is not enough. The investigation order is already signed. The Royal Navy Police have his face. They are running his financial records right now. The machine is awake, Commander. Stay out of the way." The line went dead. I placed the heavy phone back into my bag. I leaned my head against the cold glass. Marcus Pemberton thought he had poured soup on a lonely unmarried woman. He did not realize he had just punched the Ministry of Defense in the mouth. My apartment sat on the edge of the water. Bare walls. No family photos. No decorative pillows. Just steel furniture, polished concrete floors, and a clean, sterile smell. The large windows looked out over the dark rolling expanse of the Thames. Harris walked in and dropped a thin manila folder onto the stainless steel counter. He did not say a single word. He just tapped the cover with 2 thick fingers and walked back out the front door. Military intelligence always moves faster than local police. I flipped the folder open. Marcus Pemberton, 47 years old. Self-proclaimed property developer. He liked to wear alligator skin shoes and custom suits. He liked to yell at women in public. But the paper in front of me told the real story. Marcus was not just a loudmouth. He was a federal target. The Ministry of Defense had been tracking his dummy corporations for 8 months. Government contracting fraud. He was skimming money off ministry construction bids, padding concrete invoices. billing the government for high-grade steel and delivering cheap, substandard scrap, siphoning taxpayer pounds to pay for his fancy cars and his expensive cologne. I turned the page. My finger traced down to the financial guarantor section. There it was. Sebastian Ashworth, my little brother, the golden boy of the family, the man my father worshipped as the future of the bloodline. Sebastian had signed his name on the dotted line. He was using our family trust and the old money reputation of the Ashworth name to back Marcus's federal money laundering operation. I stared at Sebastian's neat, arrogant signature in black ink. They were drowning. They were standing on a trapdoor with a noose around their necks, and they didn't even know it. If Marcus had just eaten his steak that night, if he had just ignored me and kept his mouth shut, they could have kept stealing for years. The federal agents were building a slow, methodical case. But Marcus lost his temper. Marcus threw a bowl of hot soup, and by doing that, he forced Admiral Richardson to flag his face in the National Security Database. He accelerated the timeline from 8 months to 8 hours. I closed the folder. A cold, hard nod of satisfaction settled deep in my chest. They dug their own grave. I was just going to stand back and watch the dirt fall in. I walked into the bathroom. I peeled the ruined silk shirt off my skin and threw it directly into the trash. I stood under the shower, turning the water dial all the way to cold. The icy spray washed the smell of garlic and tomatoes down the stainless steel drain. When I walked back into the bedroom, my civilian cell phone lit up on the nightstand. 3 missed calls, all from my mother. 0 missed calls from Adrian. My father had made his choice. A text message flashed across the locked screen. An unknown number, but the arrogant tone belonged entirely to Marcus. You should have kept your mouth shut and apologized. You are nothing in this town, Rosalind. You are a nobody. I looked at the glowing letters in the dark room. The corner of my mouth pulled up. It was a small, cruel smile. Out in the desert, in the burning heat of Helmand province, I learned a very simple truth. The men who scream the loudest are always the ones who die first. They scream because they are terrified. True predators do not make a sound until their teeth are already in your neck. I did not reply. I did not block the number. I picked up the phone, opened the nightstand drawer, and tossed it inside. The drawer slid shut with a heavy wooden clack. I turned off the bedside lamp. The room plunged into absolute blackness. I pulled the heavy military-issue wool blanket over my chest. I closed my eyes. My heart rate dropped back to a steady resting rhythm. Tomorrow was going to be a bloodbath. And I needed to be wide awake when the first body dropped. That night, while Sebastian and Marcus drank red wine and laughed about their hollow victory, I slept 8 solid, unbroken hours. My breathing was slow, even and mechanical. The quiet, rhythmic breathing of a beast waiting for the sun to rise. The bell above the heavy oak door rang. The sound was dull, muffled by the thick air inside Hartwell's rare books. The shop smelled like dry rot, decaying paper, and heavy beeswax. It was the smell of things that had survived a long time simply by being ignored. I stood in the center of the narrow aisle. I did not slouch. My spine was a steel rod, my shoulders pulled back, my chin parallel to the floor. Mrs. Hartwell sat behind the antique cash register. 82 years old, skin like crushed tissue paper. She pushed her wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose and stared at me. She did not look at my face. She looked at my military posture. "What did they do to you this time?" she asked. Her voice was a dry rasp. No pity. Just a flat, surgical observation. I did not answer. I reached out and picked up a heavy leather-bound book from the shelf. I brushed the dust off the spine. My thumb ran over the embossed gold lettering. Mrs. Hartwell let out a short, harsh breath through her nose. "The Ashworth men have always been terrified of things they cannot control," she said. "A world where a woman is highly capable and does not ask for permission is a threat to their entire reality. Adrian has been living in a cheap illusion for 30 years. She was the only person in this postal code who saw through the bloodline." I set the book down, gave her a single nod, and walked back out into the cold street. The morning air bit at my face. I pulled my civilian phone from my heavy coat pocket. The screen showed a new voicemail. The caller identification belonged to Adrian. I pressed play. The compressed, tiny audio of his voice scratched against my ear. Lexi. Not a greeting. Not a question about my chest where the boiling soup hit me. Just my name delivered like a heavy, exhausted disappointment. "There is a slight misunderstanding with a federal agency regarding Sebastian's development firm today," he said. "You made a scene last night at the restaurant. You upset Marcus. Call me back immediately. We need to clean up your mess before the White Night Gala tonight. I stood perfectly still on the concrete sidewalk, the sheer blinding arrogance of it. Marcus had poured hot food on my chest, and my father had managed to twist the narrative to make me the aggressor. I upset him. It was a classic Ashworth tactic. Gaslight the victim. Protect the golden boy. Force the daughter to absorb the blame so the family name stays perfectly clean. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen. A weaker version of me would have called back. I would have yelled. I would have tried to defend myself. I would have begged my father to see the truth. But trying to reason with Adrian was like firing a rifle into a thick fog bank. You waste your ammunition and the fog does not care. I pressed the red trash can icon. Message deleted. I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. I did not reply. I did not send a text message. I cut the supply line. Absolute silence is the ultimate weapon. It strips a dictator of his control. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a dark grey government sport utility vehicle idled in front of my driveway, the exhaust plumed white in the cold air. Special Agent Davies leaned against the hood of the vehicle. He wore a cheap nylon windbreaker and heavy tactical boots. His jaw rotated slowly, chewing a piece of spearmint gum. He did not look like London old money. He looked like a man who kicked down doors for a living. I walked up the driveway. He stopped chewing. He picked up a thick manila folder from the hood and tossed it toward me. I caught it out of the air. The cardboard was heavy. Marcus Pemberton just committed the stupidest crime of his entire career, Davies said. His voice was flat, devoid of any humour. At 0400 hours, Federal Cybersecurity flagged an unauthorised breach attempt on the Royal Navy personnel database. Pemberton hired a third-rate local hacker to pull your service record. I opened the folder. Black and white surveillance photographs, code strings printed on secure government paper. Why? I asked. He wanted dirt. Davy spat the gum into a paper napkin and shoved it into his pocket. He was looking for something to embarrass you with at the gala tonight. A dishonourable discharge. A psychological evaluation. He wanted to parade your failures in front of London high society and prove you were exactly what your family thinks you are. Derek thought you were hiding a shameful secret. He thought he could buy your humiliation. I closed the folder. I looked at your face, Davy said. He crossed his thick arms over his chest. We have the arrest warrant. A federal judge signed it 20 minutes ago. My team is already moving into position at the White Night Gala. When the clock hits 8:30 tonight, every single exit door in that ballroom is going to be locked and guarded by federal agents. Davies looked at my face. He was looking for hesitation. He found nothing. Are you ready for the stage, Commander? He asked. I did not smile. My eyes were completely dead. I gave him one short, sharp nod. 8 o'clock. The sun had already dropped below the Thames, leaving the sky the colour of a bruised vein. I stood alone in my bedroom. The full-length mirror reflected the cold, hard light of the overhead bulb. I was not wearing the cheap cream silk from yesterday. I was not wearing the sad, invisible uniform of a middle-aged spinster. I slid my arms into the heavy, stark fabric of a Royal Navy service dress white jacket. The cut was immaculate. The pure white material was pressed so sharp, it looked like it could cut the air in half. I fastened the heavy gold buttons down the front. Each click was a small mechanical sound in the dead quiet of the room. I reached for the small velvet box on the dresser. I took out the ribbons, solid blocks of colour representing combat deployments and survival. I pinned them perfectly centered above my left breast pocket. Then I picked up the heavy cold metal of the naval decoration. I held it in my palm. It felt like a block of lead. It was not a piece of jewellery. It was a receipt. A receipt paid in blood, choking dust, and sleepless nights in the Middle East. I pinned it directly over my heart. I reached up and fastened the final stiff collar hook at my throat. It choked off the air just a fraction, a physical reminder of the discipline. I looked at my own eyes in the mirror. The sad, silent daughter of Adrian Ashworth died yesterday on a hardwood floor covered in cheap soup. She was gone. I grabbed my uniform cover, turned on my heel, and walked out the front door. The commander was going to the gala. The trap was set. 8:30 in the evening, the White Night Charity Gala ballroom hummed with the quiet, expensive noise of London's upper-class elite. The air inside the room felt heavy, choked with the smell of dry champagne, vanilla buttercream, and roasted meat. At table 12, Sebastian leaned back in his velvet chair. He crossed one leg over his knee, swirling a half-empty glass of deep red wine. He laughed at something Marcus said. Marcus sat next to him, wearing a fresh, custom-tailored tuxedo, adjusting his heavy gold cufflinks. He was completely ignoring the scuff mark on his Italian leather shoe from last night. Beside them, Adrian sat perfectly straight. His chin was tilted up as he nodded to a local city councilman. The patriarch was in his element, holding court, the absolute ruler of his tiny, irrelevant kingdom. They were so incredibly blind. None of the men at table 12 noticed the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swinging shut. They did not hear the dull, metallic click of the deadbolts locking into place. They did not see the men in cheap nylon windbreakers stepping out of the shadows, standing shoulder to shoulder at the exits. The federal agents kept their hands resting naturally near their waistbands, their eyes sweeping the crowd. The trap was closed. The air inside the room was running out, and my family did not even know they were suffocating. A microphone screeched. Just a short, sharp burst of static. The ballroom went dead quiet. Hundreds of faces turned toward the main stage. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the wooden podium. He adjusted his silk tie and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said. His voice echoed off the high-vaulted ceiling, bouncing over the crystal chandeliers. "Tonight, we are standing in the presence of an extraordinary individual, someone who made the most brutal, unforgiving decisions to protect the lives of servicemen in Helmand Province." At table 12, Sebastian let out a quiet, bored sigh. He checked his expensive watch. Marcus rolled his neck, picking up his bourbon glass. The recipient of the commendation for operational valor. The MC paused. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the room shifted. "Commander, Royal Navy Special Forces, Rosalind Ashworth." The ambient chandeliers snapped off. Total darkness hit the room for one split second. Then a single blinding white spotlight sliced down the center aisle. It hit me. I stepped into the light. I wore the service dress white uniform, crisp, flawless, cutting through the dark room like a razor blade. The heavy gold buttons caught the harsh light. The naval decoration rested heavy over my left breast pocket, right above 3 solid rows of combat ribbons. I walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted. My black boots hit the hardwood floor with a slow, measured cadence. At table 12, the crystal wine glass slipped right out of Sebastian's fingers. It hit the floor. The stem shattered into a dozen pieces. Dark red wine bled into the thick white carpet like an open wound. Sebastian did not even look down. His jaw hung open. His eyes were wide, staring at the uniform, staring at the medals. Marcus gripped the edge of the table. The blood drained completely out of his face, leaving his skin the color of dirty wax. He looked at the white uniform, and his eyes widened in raw, unadulterated terror. He finally realized who he had assaulted in that restaurant, and Adrian, the great dictator. He froze. His knuckles turned bone white on the tablecloth. His chest heaved with short, broken breaths like a man having a sudden, massive coronary. His entire false reality was crumbling right in front of his eyes. The daughter he forced into the shadows was standing in the blinding light, wearing the highest honors of the Royal Navy. The ballroom erupted. Hundreds of people stood up. The applause rolled over the room like thunder. But as the bright spotlight hit my eyes, the sound warped, the clapping distorted. The polite cheers stretched and tore, turning into the deafening rhythmic roar of Chinook helicopter blades chopping through thin mountain air. The smell of expensive champagne vanished. My nose filled with the thick, choking stench of burning diesel, hot sand, and raw spilled blood. I was not in London anymore. I was dragged violently backward into the pitch-black night of Pulialam. Dust coated the back of my throat, grinding between my teeth. The canvas of the forward medical tent whipped violently in the rotor wash. The air was chaotic. Men were screaming. Boots were running across packed dirt, and beneath it all, the weak, pathetic beep of a field heart monitor. Private Thompson lay on the metal folding table, 19 years old, a kid from Yorkshire. His chest cavity was torn wide open by shrapnel. His blood was soaking into the sleeves of my uniform, warm, thick, and sticky. A combat medic grabbed my shoulder. His eyes were wide, panicked, reflecting the spinning red emergency lights. He screamed over the mortar fire. "Commander, we have 2 men pinned down on the North Ridge, and we have 14 men trapped inside the ammo dump. The bird can only take 1 group. We have to make the call." I tasted salt on my lips, sweat and copper. 2 men or 14 men. It was not a math problem. It was an execution order. The heavy, crushing weight of command pressed down on my spine, driving me into the dirt. I looked down at Thompson. His eyes were rolling back in his skull. He was looking at me, begging for a miracle I did not have, drop the ridge. My voice cracked out dry and ruthless over the radio. Extract the 14. Tell the bird to move. The medic bolted out of the tent. I stood over Thompson as the heart monitor flatlined. A long, continuous high-pitched tone that dug a hole straight through my skull. I left 2 men to die in the sand. I traded their lives for 14 others. I blinked. The harsh spotlight of the London ballroom blinded me again. The deafening applause was still going. Men in expensive tuxedos were clapping for me. Women in diamond necklaces were wiping away polite artificial tears. They saw a hero. I felt the ghost of 2 dead men pressing down on my shoulders. A weight I could never put down. A debt I could never repay. I walked up the short wooden stairs to the stage. I stopped right behind the podium. I did not lean on it. I looked out over the sea of wealthy, comfortable faces. My eyes locked directly onto table 12. Sebastian was shaking. Marcus was sweating heavily through his tight collar. Adrian could not even meet my gaze. He stared at his plate. It was pathetic. They measured human strength by the price of their tailored suits and the balance of their bank accounts. They wore their fake power like costume jewelry. They would never understand the cold, ugly language of survival. They would never know what it costs to wear this uniform. The medal on my chest was not a trophy. It was a tombstone. I reached up. Scarred index finger brushed against the cold metal of the decoration. I did not step up to the microphone. I did not give them a speech about bravery or family or honor. They did not earn my voice. I stood at strict attention. I brought my right hand up in a slow, perfectly rigid salute, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, but for the 19-year-old kid who never made it off that metal table. I held the salute for exactly 3 seconds. Then I dropped my arm. I turned away from the microphone and walked down the wooden stairs, heading straight across the floor toward table 12. The crowd separated. It was a physical parting of the sea. The wealthy elite pulled back, pulling their silk dresses and tailored jackets away from the center aisle. They smelled blood in the water. I lowered my right arm and walked. My boots made a heavy rhythmic thud against the polished hardwood, transitioning to a soft crunch as I stepped onto the thick dining carpet. Marcus backed up. His thighs hit the hard edge of the heavy banquet table. The silver cutlery rattled against the porcelain plates. He was sweating. Thick, greasy drops rolled down his forehead, soaking into the stiff white collar of his custom tuxedo. He rubbed his hands together, fast, desperate friction. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. "Commander," his voice shook. "I did not know. I am sorry about last night. It was a mistake." I looked at his polished Italian leather shoes, then I looked at his eyes. "Mr. Pemberton," I said. My voice was a flat deadline. "Your mistake was not failing to recognize my rank. Your mistake was believing a human being's worth depends entirely on the clothes they wear." Before he could open his mouth to stutter another excuse, Davy stepped out of the shadow of a heavy marble pillar. 2 federal agents in dark suits flanked him. Davies did not slow down. He did not introduce himself. He closed the distance, grabbed Marcus by the left shoulder, spun his heavy body around, and forced his arm violently high up between his shoulder blades. Marcus let out a sharp, pathetic yelp. The heavy steel of the handcuffs caught the light of the chandelier. Click, click. The ratcheting sound of cold metal locking down tight over bone and flesh echoed through the dead, silent room. "Marcus Pemberton," Davy said. His voice was flat and utterly bored. "You are under federal arrest for contracting fraud and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Marcus's knees completely gave out. His survival instincts simply collapsed. The 2 federal agents caught him under the armpits, hauling his dead weight back up. They dragged him backward. His expensive leather shoes scraped uselessly across the floor. As they pulled him toward the heavy oak doors, Marcus turned his head. He looked directly at Sebastian. It was the cold, calculating look of a drowning man preparing to pull someone else under the water with him. It was an explicit promise. "I'm going to trade your name for a lighter prison sentence." Sebastian broke. The smooth, arrogant businessman simply evaporated. He stumbled backward, his knee catching the heavy wooden leg of his dining chair. It tipped over with a loud crash. He reached out with shaking hands, his fingers grasping the white fabric of my uniform sleeve. He pulled hard, dragging me away from the table, away from the staring eyes of the crowd. toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the private terrace. I let him pull me. I wanted him isolated. The cold wind hit my face the second we stepped outside. The terrace was completely empty. Bare concrete and black iron railings. Below us, the dark water of the Thames smashed against the stone seawall. Sebastian let go of my arm and paced. He was sweating heavily despite the freezing air. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing the moisture across his skin. The tailored suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big for him. He looked exactly like what he was. A large, terrified child who had just broken an expensive window. "Rosalind, you have to fix this," he sounded frantic. His voice cracked. "You have clearance. You have influence with these federal guys. Tell them last night was a misunderstanding. Tell them Marcus is a good guy." I stood perfectly still with my hands clasped behind my back. I watched his chest heave. "If Marcus talks to the feds, if he goes to federal prison, I lose everything." So Sebastian grabbed the iron railing, leaning over the dark water. "I signed the guarantee papers, Rosalind. I just wanted to win. I just wanted father to look at me and be proud. You know how he is. I had to succeed. I had to show him I could double the family trust." I looked down at my left arm. I looked at the exact spot where his sweaty fingers had gripped my sleeve. I reached over with my right hand and brushed the white fabric. A slow, deliberate motion, dusting off the dirt. My silence made him panic more. He stepped closer, reaching out again. I stepped back. The physical distance was a brick wall. "You cannot build a life worth living on borrowed success, Sebastian," I said. My voice was quiet, completely void of sympathy. "We are family." Actual tears spilled over his lower eyelids, dropping onto his expensive silk tie. He was weaponizing the bloodline. He was pulling the emergency cord he had ignored his entire life. "You are my sister. You have to protect me." I looked at his crying face. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity. Just a cold, heavy disgust. "My rank did not protect me from flying shrapnel in a combat zone," I said. My words cut through the freezing wind like a combat knife. "Why should it protect you from the consequences of your own greed?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "If discipline is only applied when it is convenient, it is not discipline, Sebastian. It is a joke." His legs gave way. He dropped to his knees on the freezing stone. He wrapped his arms around his own chest, rocking back and forth, sobbing into the dark, empty wind. The golden boy of the Ashworth family reduced to a shivering puddle of debt and cowardice. I did not reach down to help him up. I did not offer a comforting word. I turned my back. The heavy soles of my boots clicked against the concrete. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped back into the warm, bright light of the ballroom. The game with the children was over. I looked across the room. Sitting perfectly still at table 12, staring at the empty chairs of his ruined legacy, was Adrian Ashworth. I adjusted my collar, squared my shoulders, and started walking. 4 days. That was the lifespan of the fallout. 96 hours of dead, suffocating quiet across the entire Ashworth estate. Thursday afternoon, I sat behind the heavy steel desk in my home office. The air smelled of stale black coffee and old paper. I was reading over a thick stack of unclassified logistics reports. Tracing a pen down the columns, the brass door handle clicked. Adrian pushed the heavy door open. He did not knock, but he did not barge in with his usual heavy, arrogant stride either. He walked in like a man who had forgotten how to walk. I put my pen down. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the springs creak loudly in the quiet room. I almost did not recognize him. The 79-year-old patriarch of London high society looked like a rotting house that had finally caved in on itself. He was not wearing his custom-tailored suit jacket, just a wrinkled, stiff white dress shirt. The collar was unbuttoned, exposing the loose skin of his throat. His expensive silk tie was missing. His shoulders, usually pulled back in strict defiance of his age, slumped heavily toward the floor. He walked slowly over to my desk. He did not sit down in the guest chair. Instead, he planted 2 shaking hands flat on the edge of the cold steel surface, leaning his entire body weight on his wrists. For the first time in my entire life, my father did not look down his nose at me. He looked at me eye to eye, dead level. "When you packed your bags and left for the Navy," Adrian said. His voice was a dry, ugly rasp. It sounded like heavy grit sandpaper scraping against a concrete block. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to pull moisture back into his throat. "I called it a refugee camp for losers. I told the family you were running away because you could not hack it in the real world." I did not interrupt him. I just watched his knuckles turn white against my desk. I did not say that because I looked down on you, Rosalind. He closed his eyes. The deep weathered wrinkles around his eyelids tightened. I said it because the second you picked up that heavy canvas duffel bag and walked out the front door, I knew. I knew you were braver than I ever was. I kept my spine pressed firmly against the back of my chair. Absolute silence. I let his confession hang in the air, heavy and awkward, in the sterile room. I did not offer him a polite out. Adrian opened his eyes. He stared down at the wood floor between his expensive shoes, his chest hitched, a short, broken intake of air. I forced Sebastian to be flawless, he whispered, shaking his head. I pushed him until he broke. He became a fraud and a criminal just to impress me. And I forced you to disappear into the background. I treated you like absolute dirt and you became a general. Then it happened. A single drop of water spilled over his lower lash line. A hot, heavy tear rolled down the deep creases of his cheek. It hit the collar of his wrinkled shirt, leaving a dark, wet spot on the white cotton. It was the very first tear I had seen this man shed in 79 years of life. The great, untouchable dictator of the Ashworth bloodline was standing in my home office crying. I do not know how to look at you and say I am sorry, Adrian choked out. His voice cracked violently in half. Because I cannot say the words without admitting that my entire life, the way I built this family, was a complete lie. I sat there. I looked at the old, broken man leaning over my desk. When I was 20 years old, sleeping on a hard, narrow rack in a humid barracks, I would have killed for this exact moment. I spent 32 years starving for this apology. I wanted to hear him admit he was wrong. I wanted him to see my worth. I wanted to watch him bleed, but looking at him now, I felt nothing. No triumph, no lingering anger. The apology did not carry any weight anymore, because I did not need him to validate my existence. I had already built my own. I know, I said. My voice was calm, even flat. And proving you wrong out there in the dirt was a lot easier than shrinking myself down to fit inside the glass cage of this family. Adrian squeezed his eyes shut. More tears leaked out, catching in the grey stubble on his jaw. His hands shook harder against the steel desk. Can you ever forgive me? He asked. The question was a pathetic, weak whisper, the sound of a drowning man begging for a life raft. I looked at him. I did not need to think about it. I stood up. I walked around the edge of the heavy desk. I stopped right next to him. I lifted my right hand, the hand with the deep scar running down the index finger, and placed it flat on his shaking shoulder. The fabric of his shirt was damp with cold sweat. Yes, I said. One word, one single sharp syllable. It cut the heavy steel chain of 35 years of hatred and resentment clean in half. I forgave him, not because he earned it. Not because his tears wiped away the way he let Marcus treat me in that restaurant. I forgave him because holding on to his failures was exhausting. I refused to pack his garbage into my sea bag and carry it for the rest of my life. I was dropping the dead weight right here on the floor. 4 months later, the October wind ripped violently across the Thames. The air was sharp, smelling heavily of salt, dying leaves, and the raw diesel exhaust from the cargo ships pulling into the port. I walked slowly along the concrete seawall. My heavy boots crunched against the loose gravel. 50 yards ahead of me, the Ashworth family walked in silence. The federal indictment had completely gutted them. Sebastian was barely recognizable. He had lost 30 pounds. The tailored suits and silk ties were gone, replaced by a cheap canvas work jacket, heavy denim, and scuffed boots. His hands were blistered and raw. He was working manual labor at a local shipping dock, trying to pay off the massive federal restitution fines Marcus had pinned on him. My mother walked quietly beside him, her head down, wrapped in a plain wool coat. Adrian walked a few paces behind them. He carried a wooden cane now. His heavy, dominant stride was permanently gone. He stopped walking. Under the harsh amber glow of a tall street lamp, Adrian turned around. He leaned heavily on his cane. Looking back down the concrete path, he saw me standing there. The freezing wind whipped my dark coat around my knees. We stared at each other through the thick sea spray. Adrian shifted his weight. He slowly raised his right arm. He straightened his elbow out, pulling his shaking hand up toward his forehead. It was a terrible salute. His elbow sagged way too low. His fingers were loose and curled, not pinned flat. His thumb stuck out awkwardly. It was clumsy. It was wrong. It was the awkward, flawed gesture of a civilian who had never served a single day in his life, but it was the ultimate bow of a defeated king. It was complete, unconditional surrender. I did not smile. I did not wave. I stood at absolute attention. I snapped my right hand up to the brim of my cover. My fingers were locked perfectly straight. My forearm formed a flawless, rigid 45-degree angle, a razor-sharp textbook military salute. I held it for exactly 2 seconds, acknowledging the surrender, respecting the dead war between us. Then I snapped my hand down. I turned around and walked away into the cold October wind. I did not look back. The war was over. Noise and arrogance always lose to the silence. In the end, you just have to wait them out. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? If you know exactly what it feels like to finally drop that heavy baggage and step into your true power, drop a 100 in the comments right now. I want to see you. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and keep your head high.